In the small village of Agbokor, hidden in the lush green hills and wrapped in the songs of ancient trees, lived a powerful rainmaker named Agaba. Known for his wisdom and mystical prowess, Agaba was both feared and respected. With his weathered, calloused hands, he could summon rain from the bluest of skies or halt a storm with a whisper. But more than his powers, Agaba was deeply devoted to his only daughter, Uzoaku. She was beautiful, with a gentle heart and laughter that sounded like a brook in the forest. One day, a young man named Chuma came to Agbokor to ask for Uzoaku's hand in marriage. Tall, with a smile that won over every heart, Chuma captured the attention of the entire village. He came from a good family and was known to be hardworking and kind. Agaba, sensing Chuma's sincerity and impressed by the young man's devotion, promised Uzoaku to him. The village was abuzz with excitement. Chuma and Uzoaku seemed a perfect match, and Agaba was overjoyed. However, as days turned into weeks, Chuma stopped visiting. Uzoaku waited by the edge of the village each evening, watching for him, but he did not return. Her heart grew heavy with worry, and whispers began to spread through the village like wildfire. One day, news reached Agaba and Uzoaku that shattered their hearts. Chuma had married another girl from Agbokor. Betrayed and confused, Uzoaku wept, her sorrow blending with the winds that rushed through the village. Agaba was furious, his pride wounded and his daughter's spirit crushed. The betrayal was too much to bear, and he vowed that Chuma's wedding day would be remembered as a day of reckoning. The day of Chuma's wedding arrived with golden sunlight streaming over Agbokor, and preparations for the celebration were in full swing. However, as the villagers gathered, a dark cloud began forming on the horizon. Agaba stood atop a hill overlooking the festivities, his hands raised to the sky, chanting softly. The air grew heavy, and in moments, a downpour unleashed upon the village. The rain was relentless, each drop falling with the weight of Agaba's broken promises. Thunder rumbled, and lightning cracked across the sky, as if to echo Agaba's anger. The beautifully decorated tents collapsed. The fires were extinguished, and the guests were soaked to the bone. Food was ruined, and the guests began fleeing to their homes as the rain showed no signs of stopping. For the entire day, Agaba commanded the skies, letting his rage pour down over the festivities. By nightfall, every trace of Chuma's wedding had washed away in the muddy grounds of Agbokor. Agaba watched as the rain slowed, the clouds gradually lifting, and he returned to his daughter. As he embraced Uzoaku, he whispered softly, "No one will ever break your heart so carelessly again, my daughter." From that day, Agaba swore to guard her heart with all his power, while the villagers learned that the Rainmaker's promise was one that could never be taken lightly. Days after the disastrous wedding, word began to spread that it was Agaba's wrath that had summoned the storm. Chuma heard the whispers as he worked in his new family's fields, rumors about the Rainmaker's anger and how it had ruined his wedding day. At first, he brushed them off, embarrassed by the reminder. But when he visited the market and heard vendors murmuring that Agaba had cursed his union, rage ignited within him. Chuma stormed back to his new home and sat in silence, brooding over what he'd heard. He had left Uzoaku because he found a woman he felt was better suited for him, a choice he believed was his right. Yet, Agaba had taken it as an insult. To Chuma, this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a cruel abuse of power. Determined to confront the Rainmaker, he marched to Agaba's home on the edge of the village. By the time he arrived, it was late afternoon, and Agaba was tending to a small fire in front of his shrine. The air was tense as Chuma approached, his face set with anger. "Agaba!" Chuma shouted. The old man looked up calmly, but there was a guarded look in his eyes. Chuma stepped closer, his voice thick with contempt. "You ruined my wedding day. My family was shamed. My guests left humiliated, and you turned the skies against me for following my heart." Agaba studied him in silence, his face unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice low and filled with the weight of his years. "You came to me with promises, Chuma. You looked into my eyes and asked for Uzoaku's hand. You convinced me, her father, that your intentions were pure, yet you abandoned her without a word. You thought you could break my daughter's heart and walk away with a new bride as if she were nothing. Chuma took a step forward, his voice a hiss of anger. You had no right to curse me, Agaba. You think your power makes you untouchable, but I am not afraid of you. If you do this to me, what's to stop you from cursing others? I can expose you for this madness. Agaba didn't flinch. He rose slowly, his tall, lean figure casting a shadow over the fire. You may try, Chuma, he replied, his voice as cold as the winds, he commanded. But know this, my power is not in a shrine or in my reputation. It is in my people's respect and trust. They know what you did to Uzoaku, and they stand by me. Chuma's fists clenched as he glared at the old man. So be it. If they won't turn against you, I will take your shrine myself. I will tear it down and expose you for the tyrant you are. Agaba's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer to Chuma. You may try to destroy what you see as my power, but you'll find that true power is born from the heart. My shrine is sacred, not because of what is inside it, but because of the devotion and trust of this village. And if you tear it down, the very rain you loathe will rise against you, washing away everything you seek to build. With that, he turned his back on Chuma, dismissing him with an eerie calmness. Chuma's anger reached a fever pitch. He spat on the ground, vowing to return that night to end Agaba's hold on the village. But as he left, he could feel the tension in the air, as if even the sky held its breath. That evening, Chuma snuck into the sacred forest where Agaba's shrine stood. With a torch in one hand, he approached the shrine, ready to burn it down as proof of Agaba's so-called fading power. But just as he raised the torch, the ground trembled beneath him, and a sudden gust of wind snuffed out the flame. A voice as deep and rumbling as thunder filled the air around him, though there was no one in sight. You may break a promise, Chuma, but the earth remembers. The rain remembers. As fear finally struck his heart, he turned to leave, only to find his feet sinking into the wet earth. Rain began to pour, as if the skies themselves were punishing him, and in his panic, he fled back to the village, drenched and defeated. From that day on, Chuma was seen as a man cursed, his crops always the first to wither in drought, his land forever damp from rains that seemed to fall only on his fields. He lived with the whispers of betrayal, not only for leaving Uzoaku, but for attempting to defy Agbokor's Rainmaker. And as he worked, alone in his cursed fields, he could feel Agaba's watchful presence in every raindrop. Years passed, and Uzoaku remained in her father's home, untouched by the life of marriage and family that most young women in Agbokor embraced by her age. Her beauty only grew with time, and her gentle nature became a symbol of grace in the village. Yet, no suitor dared approach her. The men of Agbokor feared Agaba's wrath, and even the bravest among them shied away from risking the Rainmaker's anger. Rumors circulated through the village like an invisible fog. Some said Agaba would curse any man who hurt Uzoaku. Others whispered that even a small quarrel with her could bring drought, ruin crops, or flood entire harvests. Uzoaku, hearing these rumors, felt a growing sorrow in her heart. She had longed for a family, children to call her own, and a life beyond the confines of her father's home. But her life, like the rains her father summoned, was beyond her control. Despite her unspoken pain, Uzoaku remained devoted to her father. She saw the love he had poured into every storm he called down upon Agbokor, and understood that his anger had not been for his pride alone, but for her protection. Still, there were times she found herself gazing at couples in the village, imagining what her life might have been, if not bound by the silent barrier her father's power had created. Agaba, too, was aware of the distance his protective reputation created around his daughter. He noticed the lingering glances and the whispered words, but he remained resolute, unwilling to risk Uzoaku's heart on men who might leave her as Chuma had. One evening, as Uzoaku sat with her father by the fire, she finally spoke up. "Father," she began softly, "why should your power and my love be a curse? All I have ever wanted is a life where I can be free to love, to trust, and to make my own choices. Agaba looked at her, his old eyes weary but wise. Uzoaku, my child, I would do anything to see you happy, but your heart is a treasure, and too many see it only as a prize. I fear that if I release my hold, you will face the same pain I tried to shield you from. But, father, she replied gently, if I am to know true happiness, I must be free to choose. Even if it comes with risk, your love has sheltered me, but it has also kept others away. I ask you to let me walk my path, even if it means you must trust that I too can weather life's storms. Agaba sat silently for a long moment, hearing the wisdom in her words. Reluctantly, he nodded. He knew that his protection could not shield her from the world forever, and that her heart needed to find its own way. He agreed finally to release his control and let her follow her path. Word soon spread through Agbokor that the Rainmaker had lifted his silent protection over Uzoaku's suitors. The village held its breath, waiting to see who might be brave enough to approach her. And gradually the young men of Agbokor began to feel hope, the heavy clouds of Agaba's watchful power fading like morning mist under the sun. One by one, suitors approached, not just for her beauty, but for her strength and kindness, and Uzoaku welcomed each with an open heart. After years of being guarded by her father, she was finally free to walk her own path, to find love on her own terms, and to live a life no longer shadowed by the threat of rain. With her father's blessing, Uzoaku decided to leave Agbokor and travel to explore life beyond the hills and forests she'd known all her life. She journeyed to a neighboring town, a place filled with bustling markets, new faces, and an unfamiliar but welcoming energy. There, she met a man named Daniel, a preacher who traveled from village to village, sharing his faith and offering guidance to those seeking light in their lives. Daniel was a man of quiet strength and kindness, known for his wisdom and compassion. He quickly sensed the gentle spirit in Uzoaku, and they spent many evenings speaking of life, faith, and the burdens of family. As she grew closer to him, Uzoaku shared her story, the years of isolation, her father's power as a rainmaker, and the fear that kept men from loving her. Daniel listened intently, touched by her journey and the love her father had, though in his way, tried to protect her. He saw the way Uzoaku's heart was weighed down, held captive by her father's legacy. Daniel knew that to free her, he had to help Agaba see that true love for one's child meant allowing them to walk their own path without fear. One day, Uzoaku brought Daniel back to Agbokor, hopeful that her father might see the purity of his intentions. The villagers watched as she walked into the village with this confident man by her side, the preacher who would dare come into the Rainmaker's land. Whispers filled the air as the people gathered, curious to see how Agaba would respond. Agaba stood at the edge of the village, his expression wary as Uzoaku approached with Daniel beside her. The two men exchanged tense glances, Agaba sensing Daniel's purpose as he introduced himself with a respectful bow. "Agaba," Daniel began, his voice steady but respectful. "I have come not to challenge you, but to help you find the peace that your heart and your daughter both deserve." Agaba's brows furrowed, his pride prickling. "What do you know of my peace, preacher? You may speak to the people of faith, but I am the one who guards this land. The rains, the skies, they answer to me. This is my way, and I do it for my daughter." Daniel nodded, unfazed by the Rainmaker's pride. "I know that your love for Uzoaku is powerful, just as your gift is powerful. But true love doesn't guard, it lets go. True love frees those it cherishes, trusting that they are strong enough to face life's challenges." Agaba's face softened, doubt flickering in his eyes. His love for his daughter was unshakable, but Daniel's words pierced his heart, making him question the foundation of his actions. "What would you have me do?" Agaba asked, his voice softened with uncertainty. "Let her live without the weight of your power over her," Daniel replied. "And let the village see that love, God's love, is the greatest strength there is. It doesn't bind, it liberates. Show them that there is power even greater than the rains." For a long time, Agaba stood silently, gazing at Uzoaku. The years of holding on to his strength and wielding his power of protecting her through fear and control, had isolated him. He saw now how she had suffered for it, how her heart longed for freedom. With a heavy sigh, Agaba nodded, placing his hand on Uzoaku's shoulder. "If it is freedom you seek, my child," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "then I will give you all that I have left to give." In a humble public act of surrender, Agaba took Daniel to his shrine, the sacred space he had kept for so many years, and began to dismantle it piece by piece. The village gathered, watching in awe as he laid down each symbol of his power, surrendering his role as Rainmaker. As he set the final piece aside, he turned to the heavens, lifting his hands in surrender, a symbol of his acceptance of the new path. At that moment, Daniel led Agaba in a prayer of faith, asking for strength, peace, and guidance. The people of Agbokor watched, witnessing Agaba's transformation from a rainmaker bound by his power to a father willing to give up everything for his daughter's happiness. They marveled at the rainmaker's humility, and for the first time in many years, the skies above Agbokor felt clear and free. With Agaba's blessing and the village's support, Uzoaku and Daniel prepared to marry, their union blessed not by fear but by love and faith. And as they exchanged vows, a gentle rain began to fall, not from a summoning or a curse, but from the heavens, a blessing on the new life they had begun together, and the peace that finally washed over Agaba's heart. After the wedding, Agaba found himself with a renewed purpose. With his shrine dismantled and his power released, he felt a peace he hadn't known before. The joy he saw in Uzoaku's eyes as she embraced her new life filled his heart with warmth, and he began to consider how he could further support her and her husband, Daniel, in their mission of faith. One evening, Agaba sat with Daniel, discussing the future of Agbokor. The village had witnessed his transformation, and many were beginning to open their hearts to the teachings Daniel shared. The people of Agbokor respected Agaba, and he sensed that his journey with faith was only beginning. "Daniel," Agaba began, his voice thoughtful, "I've spent years using my land and power for myself, but now I wish to offer you something that will serve a greater purpose for this village." Daniel looked at Agaba with curiosity, and Agaba continued, "I have land, wide, fertile plots by the edge of the village. It was once reserved for rituals and gatherings, but now I want it to be used for a house of God, a place where you can preach and guide the people." Daniel's eyes widened with gratitude. He knew how much Agaba's land meant to him, representing years of tradition and authority. Offering it now as a place of worship was not only generous, but it symbolized Agaba's commitment to embracing a new path. "Agaba," Daniel said, moved by the elder's gesture, "your land will become a place of peace and healing. Your legacy will live on, not as a feared rainmaker, but as a man who gave his people hope." Over the following months, Agaba led the way, gathering villagers to clear and prepare the land. Brick by brick, they laid the foundation of what would become the largest church Agbokor had ever seen, built not only with stone but with the devotion of its people. Villagers who had once feared Agaba now worked alongside him, carrying wood, mixing mortar, and raising the walls. Finally, the day of the church's opening arrived. The people of Agbokor gathered in excitement, looking upon the completed structure with awe. Inside, the pews filled as Daniel stood at the front, ready to share his first sermon within these newly consecrated walls. Agaba sat in the front row with Uzoaku by his side, a sense of pride swelling within him. As Daniel preached about forgiveness, love, and the power of faith, Agaba felt the truth of those words resonate deeply. He had given up his old life to allow his daughter to live freely, and in doing so, he had gained a new family, a new purpose, and a place in the hearts of his people. From that day forward, Agaba became a beloved figure, known as a man who, in his final years, had chosen love over fear and shared his legacy for the good of the entire village. And there, on his own land, the church stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the Rainmaker who had once held the power of the skies but had ultimately surrendered his strength for the power of grace. As the years passed, Agaba's health began to decline, but he remained deeply connected to the church he had helped build. The people of Agbokor grew to love him, not only as a former Rainmaker, but as a man transformed by humility and faith. His final days were filled with peace, surrounded by Uzoaku, Daniel, and many villagers who came to pay their respects and thank him for the legacy he left behind. While Agaba was still on his sickbed, Daniel, now the village's trusted preacher, sought to honor his father-in-law's wishes by giving him a Christian burial any time he died. Daniel wanted to commemorate Agaba's faith journey, to celebrate the man who had surrendered his power to God. But as soon as the villagers noticed Daniel's intentions, a murmur of resistance rose among the elders and villagers. "We respected Agaba's choices in life," said Ogudu, his voice filled with reverence, "but he was still our Rainmaker. The traditions of Agbokor are bound to his spirit. Now he still lives, and even when he dies, we cannot abandon him to foreign ways now that he is sick. Agaba may have worshipped you and gave his life to God, but his blood belongs to us, and he must return to our ancestors. We can never allow you to carry out your intention," he warned. Many villagers agreed with Ogudu's opinion, feeling that Agaba's spirit was woven into Agbokor's land and traditions. They could not afford to allow Daniel carry out his plans successfully. For generations, the Rainmakers had been buried in the old forest, a place of sacred rituals that honored their link to the natural elements. The people feared that, if Agaba was buried in the Christian way, his spirit might be torn between his new beliefs and his deep bond with the village's ancestral customs. Some even whispered that rain and harvests might suffer if his spirit was not honored properly. The rumor that Daniel was planning to bury Agaba in a Christian way anytime he died, tension grew up in the village, and Daniel received many visitors and messages from the elders not to carry out the rumors they have heard into reality. After much consultation, Daniel tried to reason with the elders. Agaba embraced this faith wholeheartedly, he explained. He gave his land, his power, and his life to the teachings of God. To honor him in a Christian way is to respect the final journey he chose for himself. But the village elders stood firm. "You are a part of this village now, Daniel," one elder said gently. "You have shared our food, married our daughter, and preached in our land. But this tradition is ancient and not easily broken. Agaba was one of us, and he deserves to rest among his ancestors, guided by the spirits of the rain and earth he once commanded." Uzoaku found herself torn between the wishes of her husband and the customs of her people. She knew her father had accepted the new faith, but she also understood the villagers' loyalty to tradition. She approached Daniel, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe we can honor both, my love," she suggested. "Let us find a way to bring peace between these two worlds." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, and together they proposed a compromise. They agreed that Agaba would be laid to rest with elements of both traditions, a Christian ceremony at the church he helped build, followed by the village's traditional burial rites in the sacred forest whenever he died. The elders agreed, seeing it as a way to honor Agaba's transformation without severing his connection to his heritage. A few days after Daniel's meeting with the elders, Daniel decided to organize a special church service in honor of Agaba while he was still breathing. The church was filled with villagers and loved ones. Daniel led a heartfelt service, honoring Agaba's life as a man of faith, humility, and love. When the ceremony concluded, the villagers guided Agaba safely to his home to rest, while waiting for the final day he would join his ancestors. In his compound, the elders performed some traditional rites, calling upon the spirits to welcome Agaba among the ancestors on the day of his death. As they completed the final prayers, a gentle rain began to fall, soaking the earth in a soft, steady blessing. The villagers looked up, feeling Agaba's presence in the rain, a final gift to the land he had cherished. His spirit, they felt, would find peace, joining both the new faith he had embraced and the ancient roots of his people. The performance played by the elders threw the church members into serious confusion, and left Daniel a state of indecision as he joined the congregation with Uzoaku. He was giving a second thought to his agreement with the elders a few days ago. When Agaba passed away, his death sent ripples through Agbokor, igniting a fierce debate that would soon divide the village. On one side were the Christian believers, led by Daniel, who insisted that Agaba had chosen a new path in life and deserved a Christian burial to honor his faith. On the other side stood the traditional elders and villagers, who argued that Agaba's bloodline, power, and heritage bound him to the customs of his ancestors. They believed a Rainmaker of Agbokor could not, and should not, be buried by any rites other than those belonging to the ancient traditions. The dispute intensified as people gathered near Agaba's home to mourn and decide how he would be laid to rest. The elders, led by Chief Amadi, spoke with conviction. "Agaba is one of us," Chief Amadi declared to the gathered crowd, his voice ringing with authority. "He may have embraced the ways of the new faith, but our village remembers him as the Rainmaker. Our customs are not merely for ceremony. They are our bond to the spirits of our land. If we do not honor him according to our sacred ways, we risk offending our ancestors. We must give him the rights that befit a man of his power and lineage." Some of the villagers nodded in agreement, recalling the deep roots of their traditions and how Agaba had once been the very heart of their connection to the land. To them, burying him any other way felt like a betrayal of the village itself. Daniel, however, was equally firm in his conviction. Agaba gave his life to God. He dismantled his shrine and gave his land to build a church. He walked a new path, and in his last days he found peace in that choice. To deny him a Christian burial would be to deny his final wishes and dishonor the legacy he wished to leave for this village. The Christian believers, many of whom had been moved by Agaba's transformation, supported Daniel. To them, Agaba's journey from feared Rainmaker to humble believer was proof of his redemption, and they saw the church as a symbol of his commitment to God. "He found a new calling," one of the believers said, pleading with the elders. "Let him rest in the faith he chose. He deserves that respect." As tensions grew, Uzoaku found herself torn between the two sides. She loved her father deeply and knew how much his faith meant to him. But she also understood the elders' fears that without traditional rites, her father's spirit might become restless, potentially angering the village's ancestors and disrupting the harmony of Agbokor. In a final effort to find peace, Uzoaku gathered the elders and Christian leaders for a private meeting, hoping to mediate a solution. Her voice was steady, though her heart ached with grief. "My father's heart belonged to Agbokor," she said, addressing the room. "But in his final days, he chose a new path. I beg you to consider a way to honor both his heritage and his faith, so that his spirit may find peace and our village may remain united." Chief Amadi considered her words, and finally he spoke. "We do not wish to deny Agaba's choices, but we cannot allow his spirit to leave Agbokor in this new way without also honoring the ancestors. If we perform the rites in our traditional manner, his soul can rest among those who came before him." After hours of discussion, they agreed on a compromise that blended both traditions. Though it was difficult for some on each side, Agaba's body would be honored with a Christian service at the church, and then, as a final gesture of unity, he would be taken to the sacred grove for the traditional burial rites. On the day of Agaba's funeral, the entire village gathered in the church he had helped build. Daniel led the Christian service, delivering a powerful eulogy that honored Agaba's journey from Rainmaker to believer. He spoke of forgiveness, change, and the strength Agaba had shown in embracing a new way of life. After the Christian ceremony, the procession made its way to the sacred forest. At the grove, the elders took over, chanting the ancient prayers, drumming, and performing the rites that had been passed down for generations. They called upon the ancestors to welcome Agaba's spirit, offering him back to the land he had once commanded as Rainmaker. As the final rites concluded, a gentle rain began to fall, soft and warm, like a blessing from the heavens. The villagers looked to the sky, sensing that Agaba's spirit had indeed found peace. In that moment, both Christians and traditionalists felt the weight of their differences lift, replaced by the unity that Agaba's life and death had brought to Agbokor. He had been both Rainmaker and believer, and in honoring both, the village found a way to honor the best of themselves as well.